All right, I'm back for part two of this Made for More devotional series, for lack of a better term on it. In video one, really talked about Adam's relationship with God. What did original relationship look like? What was Adam created to experience? We talked about that word placed in Genesis 2:15 and all the different meanings that were sort of rolled into one for that. That Adam was placed in the garden, and that word placed meant he was made to rest. He was placed where he belonged. He was given purposeful vocation. Really, he just had a sense of what his identity was, would have been belonging, accepted, just at rest and at ease, peace, contentment. And then we looked at what happened in the fall. All of that was ripped away, or not even just ripped away, but reversed. The natural order. Adam no longer was resting in a place where he belonged. He had this displacement, the exile from the garden. No longer did he work from provision and from his place of rest. He worked for provision and worked from his exhaustion. He would toil to produce crops from the ground, and the earth would resist him. Just survival just became a struggle. It literally just reversed the order of creation. And that's sort of where I left it last week, talking about this is what Jesus came to restore. We have this backwards creation that needs to get restored to what the original intent was. Before we get to fully into what the restoration looks like and what does it really mean to be in Christ and the work of Jesus, I want to look at just kind of how this reversal plays out in our humanity. And so tonight's focus is a little bit on the word rejection. Rejection is something I think everybody's experienced in some form or another. And I had a whole bunch of examples laid out we experience rejection, in our relationships, in school, in family situations, maybe in ministry, if you're in that. I'm going to look at it just from a workplace perspective today, because it's just a really easy example. And I think it's a really common example that may play to a lot of people. You may recognize yourself in the story. But what does it look like when we're trying to build our identity in our workplace? Essentially, what I was going to talk about is that what was lost in the fall is that the sense of identity was lost. So now you have humanity on this search for identity. And where do they look? Well, obviously they look apart from God, because there's now this separation from God. They don't naturally fall into this identity they were created for. So, thousands of years later, where do we look for identity? We all know where we should look for identity, but for myself, on a personal level, I often found this in work. And have you ever had the experience of being at work, being good at your job, or at least working hard at your job, putting in all the extra time and feeling like you've done it, and then watching somebody else get recognized maybe ahead of you, or you just don't get the promotion you think you deserve, or the pay raise you think you deserve, or even just the recognition, or someone patting you on the back and saying good job. Often that can be a crushing thing for some people, or at least it was in my experience. I can look back over the years, and for those who know my story, a lot of what led to my kind of spiral downward into depression was a lack of confidence in work. I would get into workplace situations, and I really had just lost confidence in my ability to do it. And it was because I was trying to find a sense of identity through a job as a carpenter. And so my identity rose or fell on my ability to do the job and not make mistakes. A mistake could be crushing for me. And I think that can be the case for a lot of people. Something goes wrong at work, it can be a crushing blow, and it leads us into these downward spirals sometimes that aren't good for us. Often we'll find, what I've seen in different situations, not always just my own, is that people will often begin to undermine other coworkers, attempt to make somebody else look worse just so I can look better. Or if that doesn't work, often, well, I've put in my effort and not been recognized for it, so I tend to withdraw my effort now. Something like that may happen. And what it usually left me with was being bitter, frustrated, and kind of an anxious mess, is the best way I could put it, where I was constantly looking for this validation through work, never receiving it, and it just led me into an endless cycle of just never being satisfied with where I was at. Now, the story I want to look at in the Bible is so where does this come from? If you look at what happened after the fall, you can really just flip to the very next chapter in Genesis and look at the story of Cain and Abel. And how does humanity function out of this in this search for identity? Cain and Abel, we're told, brought these offerings to God. Abel brings his first and best of his livestock. Cain brings some of his crops. Now, I don't know if it's worded that way particularly, is that they really point out that Abel brings the best and Cain just brings some. I think that's meant to say that Cain didn't bring necessarily the best of what he had to offer. But whatever the reasoning, God accepts Abel's offering, rejects Cain's. And what I focus tonight is, what's Cain's reaction to that? In the text it says his face fell. And when I kind of looked into what the meaning behind that was, it's not just like hurt feelings or he was a little bit upset. It talks about something inward dropping, like a soul crushing sort of emotion. And the best words I heard to describe this were, this isn't hurt feelings, it's identity level pain. And I really like that phrase. I think identity level pain is something we can all relate to. When faced with rejection, we offer ourselves out. Like Cain wasn't just bringing his crops. For him, he's offering himself. He's looking for validation. This is crops that he's produced with his own hands, and it gets rejected. So for Cain, it wasn't the crops that were rejected, he was rejected. And how does he react to that? Well, he kills his brother. He doesn't say, well, I'm going to go and bring, better crops. Or maybe he could have just, we're not told what the whole conversation, but couldn't he have just asked God, well, what do you require? Because God does say to him, what are you upset about? If you do right, won't you be accepted? And Cain says, sure, but rather than that, I think I'll just eliminate the competition. He starts the comparison or the blame game, blaming somebody else for his failure. When I look at that story, it really kind of jives with my own experience, like I said, in workplace struggles, where if something went wrong, it would be sort of an identity level pain situation for me. It would undermine, all my work and my value. And so what would I do? I wouldn't necessarily go hurt somebody, but I would definitely try to point the finger of blame to someone else. If something went wrong or there was a mistake, I immediately, had to have 16 reasons why it was this guy's fault or this guy's fault, or you should have given me better instructions. I really was awful about that when I look back on it. And it didn't, wasn't like it was a daily occurrence, but I can just picture different times in my life when I would definitely, try to place the blame somewhere else because I don't want the spotlight on me or have my faults exposed. The reason I'm using my own personal story is actually, it's interesting that today at work, yesterday we had a big concrete pour. I'm a carpenter. We do a lot of big construction projects. And in this concrete pour, something I've done, hundreds of times over the years, my job is to vibrate the concrete and everything, just, make sure everything looked good, keep it going. And something, again, I've done hundreds of times over the last 20 years, and I can do it in my sleep most days. Well, long story short, we go and we pull some forms off today. Well, some of the vibrating wasn't done properly. There's some panels that need to be filled with concrete, and you have to use a vibrator to vibrate the concrete under, and I didn't do it properly. And so we start pulling them off and we see it, and someone's like, oh no, look at this. And, it wasn't a big deal today. It was just, oh, whoops, I guess I messed that up. Let's get some grout, let's fix it. And we went and we fixed the situation. The what isn't what there, it's my reaction that was what's I reflected on a lot today after. It really made me think that, even 10 years ago, that would have been a crushing experience for me. I would have been humiliated, embarrassed. I would have been, and there were reasons why it didn't happen properly yesterday, but they didn't matter. At the end of the day, it needed to be fixed. So, but I would have been really pointing those reasons out today if if this was 10 years ago. So I sat there after work, I'm like, why don't I react that way anymore? What's changed in me? Well, it's a simple word, it's Jesus. Jesus is where we find our identity. If Jesus is where we find our acceptance, then a small blip on the radar somewhere at work or at home or in a relationship isn't going to be that identity level pain experience anymore. Now, it's just simply something that happens and we fix it and we move on. And it really puts the world around us in perspective when we live out of what Jesus has given us and what he's promised us. And I'm going to get into that more in depth. It's just obviously that's a whole video on its own, is what does it look like to be accepted by Jesus? But that's my own little experience today, just a kind of a life experience of saying, hey, this is something that's become real in my life. And that's how it looks like when it lives out. It's definitely a shift in reaction, a shift in perception. And I don't want to go on and on. This video is already longer than what I had planned for this week, and I'm going to end with another 15-minute video if I don't stop here soon. But it just goes back to that promise I talked about last week, and I want to go back to the message again, Matthew 11:28-30, when Jesus looked around at the people there, and this wasn't just an offer of like help in the moment or a little bit of rest. This is this promise of restoration. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. I'd push that even further. I'll paraphrase a paraphrase. Are you tired of being rejected? Are you tired of searching for your identity somewhere outside of Him? If so, come to Him and get a real rest. Find where your identity is supposed to be grounded and live out of that and watch your life change. Watch rejection fade away. It doesn't nullify the pain in the moment of different types of rejection, but it definitely will change your perspective on it in the long run. And I'm going to dive more into that next week, look at a couple of other examples of what life after the fall looked like and how that kind of manifested in biblical times, how it looks in our modern time. And then I really want to get into just the work of Christ, which is really the focus of all these videos. I feel like I'm just it's like a long introduction to get to the work of Jesus, which is really what's important and what I want to put my focus on. So until next week, we'll leave it there.